The text is a unique event in that it was contrary to custom effected without royal patronage. We now know that the transmission of Buddhist text from the oral to scriptural was also, as we saw yesterday, achieved about the same time, or very nearly the same time in mentioned India. A little more on that. The next translation that I am thinking of is the street translation movement introduced by Buddha in the 6th century of the Common Era. Buddha is an Indian monk. It's not certain whether it's North Indian or South Indian. And he comes to Sri Lanka to undertake a project to make the commentaries existing in the language of a small island internationally available. So it seems obvious that the cross-cultural perspective is inherent in his venture. As Kinuba has shown, this was a well-planned enterprise of which Buddha seems to have been the mastermind that kept the huge and admirable project his words together. It does not mean that he was a sole translator, but he himself is said to have translated the commentaries on the Biennial and the 4 major Nikaya texts. As we know, he was followed by other translators, such as Upasena, Mahanama, Buddhadasa, and Dhammapada. We saw in the case of mindless mission that Sinhalese traffic of his time, 12th century before the Common Era, was extremely close to the Indo-Aryan traffic of his own country, and that the oral texts he brought were in a similar linguistic medium, or a formalized version of it. As for Buddha, who is acknowledged Indian, and Dhammapada, who worked from South India, their native languages could not have been close to the language of Sinhala, which you must assume to have been either the Sinhala traffic of the 3rd century BCE or the contemporary form of the same if the texts were regularly updated. Then there's another transmission, that's the series of projects undertaken at different times in the literary history of Sri Lanka to translate the Pali canonical texts and commentaries in their new format into contemporary Sinhalese. This is a centuries-old and still ongoing enterprise. The first of these many projects seems to have been the one mentioned in Mahavansa, chapter 37, where it is said that a tailor named Mahadhammakati translated the Sutta Pitaka into Sinhala during the reign of King Buddhadasa in the 4th century. For some reason or other, if such a translation took place, it had not gained acceptance, but there is absolutely no proof, trace of its eventual survival. In later times, a class of prominent works appeared that can be regarded as 8 first hundred important Buddhist texts, which took the form of glosses or word-for-word translation. Notable among these is also the earliest prose composition in Sinhala, the 10th century gloss on the Dhammapada commentary, which I mentioned earlier. This work enables us to see the most characteristic features of this Sinhala translation, of all the Sinhala translations. When translating a Pali sentence into Sinhala, it's quite possible to retain an important part of the phraseology of the original text. For example, the Dhammapada gloss translates Eke Dhamma Mano Pupangama, or that's the word Mano Pupangama Dhamma. He translates May Dhamhu Sik Uaguma Kota Atiye. This is perfectly correct and structurally transparent Sinhalese. But there's no giving the meaning a different language here, because the Sinhala sentence merely turns the crucial terms Dhamma and Pupangama into their etymological derivatives. In a Sinhala sentence, it is possible to use virtually any particular Sanskrit noun or adjective either in its original Sattama form or reality has overcome. The singular word-for-word translations known as Sane regularly take recourse to this method when dealing with terms that we would regard as difficult to translate. This trend initiates the communication of abstract concepts.
So if I may interrupt, would you try to summarize so that everybody gets some time to speak, maybe 10 minutes?
But it may not be objectionable in text where abstract terms are. This may work all right in narrative text, but not in text where abstract terms are rare or absent. So it may not be objectionable in such text. It is an amazing fact that the pre-modern Sinhalese prose literature consists mostly of works that are full of translations from Pali narrative text. Summarily, prose translations have gained a niche in the corpus of classical Sinhala literature. The works that have gained such distinction are free translations or adaptations of the narrative portions of Pali canonical and commentary texts. So that's the general situation in Sri Lanka. The translation becomes easy because Pali words can be used without actually translating. You use the same word or the Sanskrit form of it. And so the translation process is apparently easy, but that doesn't mean that people understand that clearly. Because if you are used to this, the word to be translated is left as it is. Thank you.
Yeah, just to, if I understood you correctly, to sum up a few important points that you raised in with regard to the transmission of Buddhist texts to Sri Lanka. So I understood that, that we learned from you that first was the oral sort of a transmission, and then it went to sort of say the fixing of the text, fixing the oral text into written text. It's also another kind of a way of transmitting. And then
the translation of the commentary into Sinhala.
Yes, and then the real translation into Sinhala. Yes, and so on. So the which continues. It's an ongoing process. So this.
And they are adopting the same principle.
Yes.
Using the Pali words themselves.
So now I would like to something similar to this kind of if you have a very important statement to say, not inscription. We'll wait inscription to a later point in time because it seems a little bit out of. It's not congruent with directly congruent with our transmission. So anyone now, 10 minutes please. Whoever wants to make an important statement with regard to the transmission of the text, so please. In general, so please.
Thank you. So just to maybe get discussion going, let me say that from an East Asian perspective, a certain kind of concern with accuracy or getting it right or correctness looks misplaced. It just looks rather strange. To take Avalokiteshvara as an example, we had prior to Xuanzang, we did have this parsing, Guanyin, the discernment of the sounds of the world, but then we get Guanzizai, which is, mastery of discernment. But, so the Chinese have both, and they very happily live with both of these in circulation throughout, right down to the present day. It just seems that they were confronted with choices that were being made in part on philological grounds, but also in part because it was a living tradition, and they had to, they were really grappling with the content. And this, again, from an East Asian point of view, makes the decision between, for example, a critical versus a diplomatic versus a stemma kind of edition look a little bit, it's very important for the person doing the edition because you have to make choices. But once you back up and you're interested in transmission, I think some of this really becomes a little bit besides the point. Now there's a tendency, there used to be a tendency among Indologists to say, well, the East Asian tradition is irrelevant because, right, they didn't have access to the real goods. What I like to throw back at that is, in many cases with major, particularly Mahayana texts, the Ashtasahasrika, the Lankavatara, and so on, exist in multiple recensions in China. Recensions going back to the Han Dynasty. Typically, the Sanskrit manuscripts that we have available to us today are really quite late. You generally see with many of these texts, if you line them up with the available Chinese translations, the tendency is by the time Xuanzang comes around, the manuscript tradition in India seems to have solidified. So that the extant, the later manuscripts one finds, Nepalese manuscripts and so on, tend to correlate very well with Xuanzang's translations. But they begin to look late. If you're interested in what the texts really say, are you going to go after a late Indian recension, or are you more interested in an earlier translation that may have been much closer to the source, whatever we mean by the source? So in many respects, and this is, there's quite a few scholars, Jan Natty and Paul Harrison and so on, have become aware of the value of these early, particularly Lokakshima, Anshagam and so on translations, because it gets you closer to the original of these texts, but which is not to say that the original is what counts, because that becomes quite irrelevant if you're interested in later Indian Buddhism. I'm just trying to toss open how complicated this all is, and I do think that the kind of decisions that philologists often want to obsess about are maybe a little bit besides the point when we come to understanding transmission issues rather than translation issues.
Maybe I will have to respond and make a few remarks to these comments. I'm not an Indologist to begin with, but a Tibetologist. But someone who is interested in textual critical studies as well. I think no one would undermine or no one would question the value of studying any text at any given phase in time and place. And even if so, particularly the connotation of when we talk about the transmission of text, we are meaning the process of inception, is what I call, or then the translation, transmission, dissemination. So we have several phases of things going on. It's not a static entity. Nobody says that it is a static entity. It has its history. It's the history of evolution, transmission, and so on. And even if we are interested at any given text at any given point in time, if we want to understand the text, even if it's Xuanzang's translation, of course we want to get back. How did Xuanzang really understand? The text we have here now at the moment, is it the same text that lay before Xuanzang? That is a legitimate question, I think. But in course of the transmission, if there are some corruptions, it is also the duties of the textual scholars or editors, be it sinologists, Japanologists, Indologists. I think it will be their duty or responsibility to try to understand the text as maybe Xuanzang would have meant, at least try to come close to what Xuanzang wanted to say. And I think that is, I don't see any contradiction in this kind of attempt. And I truly believe that history of reception is as important as history of inception. How it was received in China, in Japan, and so on, and how it was perceived in China. And that is as interesting as how it developed first in India or Indian subcontinent, in Central Asia, and so on. So I don't want to take up the time, so please, if any one of you, I thank Rob for bringing up this stimulating question. So if some others want to say something on Rob's statement, that would be so useful for our discussion.
So I think I'm supposed to speak about inscription. I would like to say a few words on inscription found in Southeast Asia. So the oldest inscription in Pali language might have been found in Myanmar. It is on Jethamma Edupapua De Angedung Dathagato De Sanchayo Niro Toja Evam Vadi Mahasamano. This is in Pali. This is maybe the earliest inscription found in Pali in Southeast Asia. In Myanmar also we found the same inscription in Sanskrit, the word Jetama in Sanskrit.
If you don't mind, would you try to put it in a kind of a transmissional context? How
Of course, it is transmitted through the Pali Brahmi script, from origin Pali into the Brahmi script. And also the same word in Yetama in Sanskrit is found in Kedah in Malaysia. But in the central part of Thailand, which was the Dwar of the kingdom, most of the inscription is the extract from the Pali Pitaka. That means Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta and Buddha Udana, or the joyful utterance of the Buddha after the enlightenment. And also on the Paticcasamuppada, the script of that period is around 6th or 7th century. This is very early. And the text is exactly the same as in the Tripitaka, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, but only Pali has been found in the central part of Thailand. And also the inscription in Pali of about 15th or 16th century, beginning with the verses from the Kataha, Tela Kataha Kata, composed in Sri Lanka, but also found there. So it showed that the people of that period, that means people in Myanmar of 5th century and people in Tuar of the 6th to 7th century, received directly the Pali canon, maybe from India, but from which part we don't know, because the Pali inscription found in India is I think very rare. Only Prakrit language was there. So from the script point of view, Nilakanta Shatri said that the script was influenced by the Telugu part of India, which was at that time was under the influence of the Pallava. That's why the people or the epigraphists in Thailand use the name Pallava script for all the early period inscription in Thailand. This is maybe wrong. Actually, it should be South Brahmi script or Northern Brahmi script. So this is what I want to say.
There are two problems.
Paul.
One is the history of thought.
Yeah.
One is the history of certain processes of transmission. The other is people are interested in knowing what the Buddha said, the Vachana.
Of course.
So, I mean, whether how Hyun Sang did it only shows that a certain type of transmission took place, certain type of transmission where a number of people got together and discussed it, and one translated it and another wrote it and all that. But in the case of the southern, the Buddhists, North Asian Buddhists, they were preserving a certain language which was close to the language of the Buddha. So the impression is that they are preserving more closely the Buddha Vachana. That's why I said there are two things: the actual processes of transmission, a historical thing, how it was translated, who translated it, and all that. And the other one, the Buddha Vachana, the Buddha Vachana.
Yes, of course we cannot, I think, thank you very much. I think even for those people who are interested in history of culture in general, history of scripts, history of writing, history of medium of like how Buddhist scriptures have been transmitted, script becomes an important, the issue of scripts becomes of course as important as the issue of text, and then also the issue of books, xylographs, manuscripts, and the processes of producing these manuscripts, these inscriptions, I think are as important. Of course, from my field, I know inscriptions, stone inscriptions in Tibet, And these are usually, of course, dealing with political themes, not necessarily, but in South Asia, apparently you also have a lot of Buddhist texts or scriptures that have been inscribed, which should be actually taken into account because they are, if you are really interested in the dating of the texts or manuscripts, then inscriptions have a much higher value to manuscripts which are less.
They are quantity very small.
Yes, this was my concern.